Welcome, guys, to another episode of the Four Horsemen of Real Estate podcast. We are going to be continuing our series on the various provinces and talking about real estate and real estate investing. And if you guessed it right, on this week's episode, we're going to get into Belle Province, Quebec, and we're going to look at some of the different details, including what you can expect as a landlord, some of the legal implications, French versus English, and some of the cultural differences between a province like Quebec and Ontario, not to mention touching on immigration as well. That's all coming up on this week's episode of the Four Horsemen of Real Estate podcast. Okay, guys, first of all, number one, Quebec has a deeply rooted rental culture. Yes, across Canada, about 66% of people own their own homes. But in Quebec, it's barely 50%. And in Montreal, over 60% of the residents rent. Now, that's not just economics, it's cultural. See, renting in Quebec isn't seen as a temporary or for the poor type of measure. It's normal, it's long-term, and it's respected. For investors, what that means is strong, stable rental demand, more opportunities in multifamily. Now, sometimes you might see a less ROI in single family homes or in flipping, but these are some of the things that it can mean for the investors. We have a culture here in Canada and in the United States where we really have a great belief that everyone should be able to own their own home. And I'm not saying that this is good or bad. It's just the way that we here in Western living believe things should be. However, in many parts of the world, many parts of Europe, there are a large number of people that are actually renters, and there is no derogatory meaning behind it. There's no real socioeconomic issue culturally if you rent. In fact, in some of the largest cities around the world, renting is preferred by many, many people, many, many citizens of those countries. So before you knock it, just realize that maybe that's not how we like it here. It doesn't mean that that's how people feel about it globally. All right, number two, multifamily is a core strategy. If you're coming in and with a buy one, detach, renovate, flip, the Burr model, buy, renovate, refinance, and repeat, it's not necessarily the greatest model in Quebec. Now, when you think about it this way, Quebec investing is really much better when you look into triplexes, 5, 6, 10 units, 20 units, 100 units. Once you get into larger units and you're into the long holding long, those types of play, that's where you're really going to get a lot more opportunity in Quebec. You're going to get better tenant retention, and you're going to get steady, sort of like steady, low, slow cash flow returns when you look at multifamily in Quebec. Again, like I mentioned, it's more like European investing rather than what you might find in, say, the GTA in Ontario. Okay, here's number three. Now, this is an important one. I've had my own experiences with it in Quebec, and that is the legal system is really more about a civil code, not common law. Now, this is a game changer. So Quebec follows civil law from French and Napoleonic code. So everything from lease agreements to evictions, it's all structured differently. For example, they use notaries, not lawyers, to handle closings. And rather than two lawyers, a lawyer for the buyer, a lawyer for the seller, you have one notary in the middle who handles the transaction. And their job is just to handle the transaction, which means that they're neither working for either party. To put it in a simple context. Now, also, there is the Administrative Housing Tribunal, which oversees rent increases and rental increases disputes specifically. Rent increases follow a strict government formula. Past rents must be disclosed. They have a clause in there for that. And also, until recently, tenants could transfer their leases. They could transfer the leases kind of like a hockey trade. Um, so if you're expecting sort of the style that you have out west in, say, Alberta, where you have a lot of flexibility, you're actually in for a rude awakening for landlords when it comes to Quebec. It is very restrictive in that sense. All right, number 4, rent control is not optional. In Quebec, rent control is not optional. Let me be clear. If a tenant says you're not raising the rent by $300 just because you put in new floors, well, rent increases must match that provincial formula I mentioned, unless the tenant moves out voluntarily. So your cash flow strategy needs to include vacancy turnover planning, gradual value adds, not the sudden flips that you can do in a lot of other provinces. Legal knowledge, and you have to have local partners if you're going to be handling real estate in Quebec. Okay, number 5, immigration and population growth. It's a lot slower, but it's also more focused. Here's a stat. In 2024, Quebec only received 19% of Canada's immigration, while Ontario got 43%. That's a huge number. Quebec controlled its own immigration policy, unlike the rest of Canada. So as a result, you did not see the same type of housing boom in Quebec that you saw across Canada. Quebec had, I believe, in total, over the 4 years that we saw the Liberals allowing so many people, millions of people, in fact, in that same period of time, I believe the Quebec government allowed in 500,000 new immigrants into Quebec. Staggering difference between Quebec and the rest of the country. So population growth obviously tends to drive real estate prices. Slower growth, slower price appreciation. And here's the nuance. Quebec promotes francophone immigration, which shapes where demand actually goes. If you're investing here, target your zones carefully. You can bookmark places like Laval, Brossard, Lévis, which is across from Quebec, and I'm sorry if I pronounced it poorly. These are growth pockets. And don't forget, of course, Montreal and Quebec City themselves are great places as well. If you've ever been up to Rivière-du-Loup, there's lots of opportunities there as well. But immigration and population growth are key drivers and have been key drivers across the country. In Quebec, however, this has actually been dramatically reduced. And as a result, they have not had that huge spike that happened during COVID that the rest of us have had across the country. Okay, number 6. Okay, Quebec is a niche market, and you really have to play it right. When you get into thinking about everything from, them preferring immigration from francophones, other French countries, Quebec is one of those places where it's sort of like Europe in North America. There's more rules, there's more regulation, more rent control, but it's also cash flow investor positive in many ways. If you buy right at the right price and hold long, you're going to do well in Quebec. Don't come in with a short-term flip or condo pre-sale mindset. Instead, think, like I mentioned earlier, triplexes, sixplexes, 12s above, because you can get them at a much better cost. Many of these will not be out of your price range. Now, I'm not talking about creative financing, because obviously we know with creative financing, you can often purchase, own, buy real estate far above what you actually have available to you. But just for traditional means, Quebec is much easier because prices are much lower. And above all, understand the legal terrain. This is one of the reasons that I actually pulled out of the Quebec market. And that is, if you have a notary that represents in the middle both sides of the transaction, and you're working in a province that is bilingual, that prides itself on being francophone, one of the challenges you're going to face if you are not if you're not fluent in French, if you're not able to understand, you're relying on that that notary figure, representative, to be able to translate to you all of the details, all of your concerns. And one of the things that I ran into was in asking questions of the notary, they were not able to clearly help me understand the risks in certain contracts, not always talking about, in terms of a real estate deal, but in terms of the contracts, because we all know that the devil's in the details. And so words matter when you're talking about the legal framework. And in a province where by law, anyone can request that all documents be in French, you may also have the cost of translation there as well. And you're behind the eight ball if you're not able to translate for yourself, because many times things can be lost in translation. So you want to make sure that you stay on top of that if you're going to be in Quebec. Now, Quebec is not for everyone, but if you want low acquisition costs, if you want strong tenant demand, and you're willing to learn the system, it can be an incredible place for long-term value add to your portfolio. All right. Well, guys, that's another episode of the Four Horsemen Real Estate Podcast as we're going across the country talking about the different provinces. That's our recap on Belle Province. And we will see you guys next week on the Four Horsemen of Real Estate.